So, Mlungisi, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of technology. But before we go into technology, can you please share with us your own journey? Where did you grow up?
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Nick, for the opportunity. I hail from KZN. To be precise, there is a village not far, I think it's 10 kilometers away from Howick, the Natal Midlands.
Right.
It's known for its beauty, its greenery, and it's just 20 kilometers from the capital city of KZN, Pietermaritzburg. That's where I was born and raised.
In Howick.
Yeah, in Howick. I did my primary and junior secondary at the time. Then I had to go, because at the time there was violence. So I had to flee to study at Umsinga, the most impoverished area of KZN. That's where I did my high school.
Where exactly is it?
Umsinga, it's you pass Greytown. It's towards, it's north of Pietermaritzburg, probably 1.5 hour drive. But it's one of those areas that government recently identified for serious poverty interventions, because it's an extremely poor area.
Right.
And water has always been an issue in that place. They rely on Tugela River. When we were there studying, it was extremely difficult because we were sharing with cattle and everybody else the same water, that was being drawn from Tugela River. And, believe you me, I haven't been there recently, but we could only listen to the radio because there were no signals. The television couldn't play.
Okay.
It's a mountainous area, but it's also known for faction fights.
Right.
In KZN. I mean, if you go there, you see a lot of graves.
Political factions.
No. Tribal.
Tribal. Right.
Yeah, so you find one clan fighting against each other. So I think they were called faction fights. And and most young men, the only thing even those we went to school with, they always told us that whether they completed matric or not, they always thought about Johannesburg, coming to Johannesburg, staying in the hostels, and working in the factories, buying guns so that they could protect their families back then. It was an extremely underprivileged, impoverished community. That's where in fact, there were many other people from Durban, from Newcastle, and even some from Johannesburg who had found refuge away from violence. It's a community that opened its arms to us, even though I remember very well one time when we were protesting at school. We're not happy with the school principal over certain things, and then the men from the area came and they said to us, listen here, we welcomed you all with both arms to get education, even though we ourselves are illiterate, but we do recognize the importance of education. Now you are bringing your violent conduct, which you ran away from your areas. We're not going to tolerate that. So you had to cease immediately that violence and focus on what brought you there. So when I completed my matric, because my parents didn't have money to take me to university, so I was asked by the school principal. He thought I was doing better in biology and other areas, because they are also struggling to attract better qualified teachers to the school. to assist as an unqualified teacher for a year, which I did. Enrollment were extraordinary, you know, were quite large. I always remember the teacher pupil ratio was way above 80 to 1.
80?
Yes. You know, there was the only space that was left in the class was for the teacher to write on the notice board, on the blackboard. The desk that kids or students were using were meshed. So if you were staying at the back, you had to step over, you know, walk over.
Somebody.
Yeah, because you see that school at the time, if you had not done what was called Standard 9, then it's grade 11. At that school, you wouldn't be allowed to do grade 12 or Standard 12 at the time. But the principal defied that policy. So he admitted even older people who had worked, you know, and then realized that they needed to upgrade or to improve their studies, to come. So anyone could come and be admitted. That's why we had, I remember matric, there were more than 1,000 matric students, you know.
And as you grew up in this community, can you tell us what was your dream career?
Remember, I was very clear. I did like to be a police. That I was sure. And because we had, in my extended family, we had one cousin who was a constable. So you see, I had an idea of what it means to be but that never, you know, while other kids would admire, and that never. I think when I got to Standard 7, I could see my interest in science fields, right? And I began to think, of course, my career options were very limited because even teachers were not able to, up until I was doing Standard 11. Then what I did, I applied to various universities while I was doing Standard 11. And I received admission or application forms with what we call this thing, the academic prospects and stuff like that. So I then used that to understand what are the different options, what are the different possibilities, which universities were the best, which programs were appealing, attracting to me, what career options I could pursue. So that actually helped me. It consolidated my desire to do something. In fact, I wanted to do BSc. But then, because of the poor mathematics background, we had terrible teachers who did not have it was worse in matric. You know, we were taught by someone who had actually not passed matric, and we learned later. Not in matric, in Standard 9, that was grade 12. He had not passed, but also he had come to school, I think it was May already, so we had missed the first 3 months. And at the time you're doing standard grade, so meaning your matric exam, you needed Standard 9 syllabus plus some aspect of Standard 10 for a standard. So we had already lost a lot, which is why I could not obtain the good mathematics pass, which would have enabled me to do a BSc. I wanted to go to University of Natal, potentially or VETS or UCT, but I couldn't. Natal admitted me for BA, but they came late. The University of Durban Westville admitted me to do a bachelor's in education with an option of doing science in education. So it was a consolation in a way to say, okay, well, I would still be able to do bit of science courses, which I did. I mean, I did zoology and botany, you know. And then I couldn't. I was hoping that once I'm done with that undergraduate degree, maybe it would enable me to move into a BSc. Because that's what I really wanted to do. But I didn't realize the family pressures. Because as I was doing that undergraduate degree, it became clear that there was no chance of me staying on doing another undergraduate degree. I needed to support my siblings who were already at the university. So I was already supporting myself. Quite fun enough, whenever we went home. My father used to work at Spornet. He was a foreman. So he would put all his wages on the table and say, this is what I have for the month. So we'll sit there, mom will take something for grocery, and then I will allow my siblings, okay, what is needed? And then I would say to them, just give me 100 rand. I will then see how I survive for the whole year. This is...
For 100 rand?
Yes. Between 94, Nick, until 1999, we never celebrated Christmas at home. Because whenever everybody else was celebrating Christmas, we were thinking about what would be done in January. How are we going to raise registration fees? So that was a period where we would sit with my parents. And if we needed to go and ask someone, we tried it once, but it was so embarrassing. Some family people, but they were so derogatory towards my father, almost like, why did you take your kids to university if you couldn't afford? It was just so bad. And then the last time we tried to get a loan from the macro lenders, but the interest rate was so ridiculous. I think we did that once. I said, no, let's never do this thing again, because I could see what it was doing. So what then helped me, it pushed me to join student struggles. And we will fight so hard to make sure that people like myself and others who were even in a worse position would be allowed to register even if you had 500 rand. So we will wait in the queues at the university for days, waking up at 4, waiting to be considered. And then the officials will come, will count, and then say, okay, we can only save this number. You guys must come back the following day. But we were prepared. Because we knew there was no turning back. We couldn't go back home. Right? So there was nothing at home. So for that period, as I'm saying to you, my focus was said to my parents, whatever little that you find, focus on. And then I was fortunate that when I was doing my third year, because I was involved in student politics, but also I was pushing my academic side. I had actually the discussion with Professor Jonathan Johnson, because at the time he was a dean,
right,
and a professor, and we got along very well. And I expressed interest in research, because he inspired so much, reading his research, and then eventually what he did when I was doing my final year, he said, come, because he was running a research unit. He said, no, he used his donor funding to offer me a part-time job at a research unit whilst doing my final year. Amazing. I was able, through that stipend I was getting, to buy my first bedroom suit.
Your first suit?
No, bedroom.
Bedroom.
Suit.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So I could buy a bedroom suit. I have a proper bed with a dressing table at home. And then take some part of that money and give my parents, say, look, let's see what you can do.
And tell us, Mlungisi, looking back at those years, who did inspire you? Who were the sources of inspiration that motivated you to reach higher?
Look, let me tell you my grandmother, I'll never forget her word when I was 6 years old. I had just passed my sub A and I got a top. I was the first. In those days, they used to call a top 10 at school.
Okay.
And then the whole community will know, It was the first time in my extended family that someone will obtain position 1. And I did it in my sub A. And you can imagine how excited my grandmother and my mother and my father was at work when the results came. So we were sitting and they were cousins. Now, because some of my cousins were struggling a bit, so she was telling them, saying to them, using me as an example, saying, you saw what Mlungisi did. Just look at how your uncles, all of them, will react when they see his result. Because education and excellence are the twins that you must always embrace. Her and my mom, the two of them, they made sure that every day when I came back from school, they were not educated, but they were interested to check what I had learned and whether my book or books at the time were in good shape. I'll never forget having lost one, and I was given a hiding, and I never lost any book thereafter. So I was told, you need to take care of this. It's so important. And then 2, my father, when he told me a story about, I still have, by the way, his standard 6 certificate, where he got, I think at that time, it wasn't, what do we call it, A class or something, but in the missionary schools, there were those, I think it was an A class. He had wanted to proceed to further his studies. Her mother, with the meagerest wage from domestic work that she was doing, she's the one who was helping him, because my grandfather had no interest in education. The person who was passionate was my grandfather, and this is what my father would tell me, that my mother was the one, she will take whatever that she was getting from work and support. His eldest brother had actually wanted to support him to further his studies so that he could become a professional. But his brother struggled to get a permission to work in Pietermaritzburg City so that he could then assist my father because all of them could realize that he was gifted. He was the only one in a family of 8 who had a brilliant mind, who was doing so well at school. So as a consequence, when his brother couldn't find the permission, it meant that my father had to look for employment. And his sister's husband then found him a job at railway at the time in 1968. And then he started working there, but he didn't stop. So he would then undergo internal training. By the time he died, he actually had a certificate to drive trains.
Your father?
Yes. He would drive from KZN to Germiston. And I was at the university by then. In fact, I was in Cape Town doing my, working as a research intern and doing my master's. He would still drive from KZN to Germiston, spend weeks. He was being trained, and he got a certificate to drive a train. And I'll never forget when I was graduating with my master's, he had just got his certificate. My mother had to come with him for his graduation, and he used to get 80 and above. And he was we had one celebration party at home where he was saying, I'm grateful to my son, but also this is what I've achieved. And he said, look, If I was younger, I would have, because he had an option to go and drive trains, but he said, no, man, I've worked for, I just want to retire. I'm so tired. But this is a motivation where he was showing us
By example.
That education is so important. It doesn't matter. And he will say to us, I suffered a lot. I don't want you to be like me and your mom. So from the family side, so it would be my grandmother, my mother, and my father. But outside, you meet teachers who would be influential. At a secondary school, I'll never forget one Afrikaans teacher who was she brought me close, under her ambit, really, sort of inspired me, encouraged me in different ways. And when I went to high school, there's this teacher who used to teach us Afrikaans and biology. That one literally took me under his wing as he became like my brother and mentor at the same time. And then there's this uncle. Yeah, we still have. I met him through my mom's church. He was working at Joshua. That's another person who would lend me money. We were not even relatives. To register at the university whenever, without even telling his wife. And later on, my parents went to his house to say thank you. You had never met us, but you had interest in our child. You would give. He would give me 1,000, whatever I wanted, to register, without expecting me. Saying, no, look, when you have money, you would always. And then, of course, academically, I wouldn't lie. Professor Jonathan Johnson.
Right.
He is the one who really made me interested in research. Because not only did that, but he also opened the opportunity to really test what research environment is, and shared with me his experiences when he first published or written a journal article, and how it was torn apart by his professor, and how he felt and what you needed to do. And he became the one actually who made me to go to Cape Town to work at the research unit at the University of the Western Cape. Gave a huge motivation, and I was subsequently told when I got there that actually, the words of Professor Johnson meant a lot, because there were other people who had applied, but then there is a late person. He used to work at CHE, the Council on Higher Education, Prem Naidu. I did not know that my internship, the CSD was part of the NRF, the National Research Foundation. I did not know that he's actually the one who identified a need for science and technology policy, that we need the capacity in the country, and actually motivated for the creation of that. I learned later, because through that, then I built networks. I developed myself as a researcher. I got an opportunity to go for the first time to present in international conferences abroad and locally, and I started publishing. I got exposed to top academics nationally and internationally. And then subsequently I came to join government in 2005. Of course, in the department there were one or two people who had interest in me. The chap, he was the chief director then in the DG's office, Mr. Dan Moahi, and then subsequently became the first COO. Always, he said to me, I saw something when I interviewed you for the first job, and he would make sure that he told people what I was capable of, and he was always there. And then, of course, the current Director General, because if it were not for him and Minister Pando, quite frankly, they, for some time, will give me tasks that I had to do directly with them. I had people I needed to report to, but I had to skip. And you can imagine 2 layers in between. So if you are working directly with the Director General or the Minister, Nick, so your game.
Of course.
And Minister Pando, what type of a person she is. So I had to push myself beyond limit.
Now, Mlungisi,
And then eventually, when they couldn't find someone, I think there are 2 rounds of interviews to find a person to head this place. They couldn't. Then they said, let's try and interview this young man. I was interviewed with Professor Delarede, 2 of them. And after that gruesome interview, said, we are seconding you to NACI. Go and fix that place. We will see after that.
and Mlungisi, looking back over your career, what would you say was a turning point? Career-wise.
When I joined the Education Policy Unit in the Western Cape as a research intern, that would always be significant because it opened doors for me. But secondly, when I was appointed as a director for strategy and planning by the Department of Science and Technology, that was the second key moment for me. But then thirdly, when I was offered to come and act in this position, I can't lie, that changed my world outlook and my career, because I can't go back now. I had no idea what this position will do for me. I had no idea how it would develop me mentally, physically, well, not physically, but emotional as well. But also just, the understanding the world of work, the changing world, how challenging it is to establish networks and sustain them, managing complex tasks, multiple complex tasks, and be expected to deliver with minimum resources.
So, Mlungisi, what would you say is driving you today?
There are 2 things. As long as I see our people, the majority of South Africans, struggling to make ends meet, whenever I look at the numbers of employment and unemployment, it breaks my heart. Especially young people. That's the first thing. The second thing, when I see how many people are struggling to sleep, having eaten, wake up with food on their table, because I see that everywhere I go back home, I visit friends, you drive around, seeing young people becoming old You know, that transition from youth to adulthood has narrowed. You know, it happens so fast for some people. So for me, and I'm using this because other things about growing the economy, sorting out the education, you know, and so forth. For me, if they cannot address the employment challenge and address the inequality and poverty, they're meaningless. That's why from where I am, I want and I believe, and this is what I'm always arguing, that science, technology, and innovation will be meaningless if they do not, in a realistic way, in a concrete way, contribute towards resolving the employment and inequality challenge in this country. I strongly believe that's what drives me. That's what I say this organization and the sector in general, that yes, while it's important to build the foundation, having many scientists, young people choosing careers in science and engineering and technology, it's fine. That's what you need. You need that. But I want to see the impact on the economy and society. The day I can be able to answer that question if I'm asked about the impact and the outcomes of the state investments in science, technology, and innovation, if I can confidently and proudly say, indeed, look at Deep Sloot, how that community used to struggle. But look at it now. We've created new cities, we've changed towns, the transport system is much more better. Young people, they have access to Wi-Fi, internet, everywhere they are, because we are one of the few countries that is leading in terms of cellular phone subscriptions. You know that. And yet, I'm not so sure whether we are taking advantage of that. Right? So, and then we have pockets of excellence technologically, which we need to be able to tap into. That's precisely why I have directed my guys last year. I said to them, we import technologies as a country. I mean, don't hear me, there's nothing wrong in importing technologies if they would benefit society and have a positive impact. But we must balance. The importation of technology must be balanced against us developing our own technological capabilities and be able to export. At the same time, be able to adapt. When the new technologies are imported, we must be able to adapt and learn from such. Because if we don't do that, if the ratio between import and export of technologies is not in our favor, then we must ask some very hard questions. Right now, there is a study that I insisted that we need to undertake to address the question why both business and the public sector, including government, seem to have less confidence in locally produced or developed technologies.
So, Mlungisi, let's talk about technology. And I know it's a big question, but what does the future of technology mean to you?
Look, it means a lot. One, there's no longer any dispute that the world is in transition, is changing. So do the science, technology, and innovation systems, right? It's changing so fast, partly because of technological revolutions. Such revolutions have been expressed in different ways, but the Germans have managed to coin the term, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And through the G20, all of us, we are now talking about that development, which is essentially about saying the physical and the cyber worlds are now converging in a real sense. And that's why people are even saying that in certain countries, technologies are now being taught how to think like human beings. Because in countries like Japan, which are struggling with population growth, they will soon need robots to do the things that human beings would otherwise be doing. But also even in our own firms, we know there is story about mechanization and automation. It has always been there, but this phenomenon is we are told at least that it's radically changing the production systems. And there are a range of technologies that are said to be quite critical, right? Now, interpreting that development, that technological development, countries, they take different interpretations of that development. We need to interpret it and understand that change from our point of view of South Africa. Japan, I'm using Japan as an example, they've developed a concept of Society 5.0 because they are saying society has evolved in terms of 5 stages. The 5th stage would resemble how humans now become at the center. The focus is shift because everything is becoming so technologically that you will now need to make sure that the human species is not alienated from technology. But also, finally, I'm saying technology has a future in terms of how we can grow and enhance competitiveness of firms, but also how we can improve the quality of life of ordinary citizens. It's been proven that if it's done properly, it can help us address some of the fundamental issues that we're confronting, but at the same time it's posing new forms of challenges that we have to, because it's going to displace.
Now, Mlungisi, when you speak to future leaders, what are the skills that you advise them to focus on to future-proof their career, if that is possible?
Well, you see, because of the type of technological innovations that are happening now, which are really posing, well, depending, but some people are saying it's posing a greater threat to humanity, right? Because literally things, even lawyers and doctors, you may not need them in the way that we need them, right? Now, you then need new types of skills. You need to be teaching kids at an early stage. In fact, I support those who are saying creativity. You now need arts must now be taught simultaneously with mathematics, creativity, perseverance, resilience, positive attributes. These are the compassionate, because these are the things, these are the skills that you now need in society. Because otherwise, how do you, if a sick patient would now be consulting machines, I'm using a crude way, and it has to be, because the machines will would have data about all kinds of things, instead of saying you are dying of cancer. You know how devastating. So we then need soft skills. They are going to be more important in terms of how we are dealing with these technological innovations. But secondly, because of big data that we are now going to be confronting in future, you need leaders that are able to deal with complex, analytical data and be able to interpret that data and make sense of what the data is saying and suggesting. So the analytical dimension is going to be important as well. But also you need people that can be able to, because things, they change so fast and rapid, right? So you need someone who's able, as it were, to think so fast and yet make less mistakes.
Now, Mlungisi, looking into the future, what would you say are the key technologies that you envision will drive the future of humanity and maybe the future of the planet?
You want me to make specific technology, mention specific
Yes, the ones we should watch, the ones we should follow, and the ones we should learn.
Yeah, no, that would be a difficult question to. But overall, let me use this term of convergence technologies, right? Because underneath there is a lot. There are those that deal with neuro, that deal with brains. Because I think, for me, that's the one that's going to be driving. Because the moment the machines learn how to think like human beings, they in fact, they may even what's the right word, take over the way our brains function. For me, that's the biggest technological development that we need to be looking out for, because the moment you get to that stage where machines will be so capable of thinking, such that they could make us as human beings irrelevant and redundant, it's going to pose a major challenge to humanity.
Right.
From the point of view of the environment, of course, there is no doubt that we have to make sure that climate change, we reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Whatever technologies that would be required, sustainable technologies, that's what we need to be making sure. I know you have to, especially in developing countries, this argument about whether you can afford to go purely for sustainable and green technologies vis-a-vis, having this coal and so forth. But if we're to save the planet, then we must make sure that we reduce technologies, or make sure that technologies, they become so sustainable. We embrace green technologies that would help us to save the planet.
Right.
But I can give you later, a range of technology. But for me, that's the one. Maybe I'm biased because I'm a knowledge
Scientist.
driven person, but I just don't foresee what is another technology that would be so critical. Others, they are, because they will add value, they will change how we do things. But the one that would think better than human beings, for me, that's what, I can't remember whether it's Switzerland or Sweden, but I think one of those two countries is actually investing already, because they've realized that that's the huge possibility.
Now, Mlungisi, when you speak to future leaders, what do you tell them about social media? How they should use social media to build their career, to build their brand, and to communicate?
Look, social media is a powerful tool. There is no escaping. We're not going back to the old era of print media. I would say that we need to use social media as much as we are well aware of its negative consequence, because it can make your brand or it can tarnish your brand at the same time. And I could use the example, maybe a wrong example, of President Trump. He's thinking that perhaps by relying on social media, he's communicating his vision better than if he were to follow. But the adverse, I think the corollary to that is actually true. So when you are a leader of an organization, I think you need to have a strong team that understands communication in its broader sense, in its modern form, and the role that social media is doing. But the team that can be able to also establish a sufficient balance between the positive benefits that you want to derive and minimize the risks that social media entails, because it could also be impacting on the relationship between the employee and employees. You can imagine you have to then develop policies to regulate your staff, what they say about your organization vis-a-vis. For instance, is it only the official organizational story that must be told, or would you allow your individual employees as part of your brand, because they could be your representative of the brand, to also speak or utilize social media?
Right.
But what happens when an individual employee says something and then it draws rage or it creates, what do you do? So it's that balancing act that I will encourage them to think about, but not to shy away from, because that's where the majority of people. But last point would be, for me, use the data. Have a strong monitoring and evaluation component, because for me, every action must be evaluated and monitored, so that you can see whether is it leading towards a desired impact or not, and whether it would require change in strategy.
Now, Mlungisi, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story with us where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart and went on to achieve success?
Let me just use one example. There was a chap who was appointed at some point in my previous positions by my boss to do something totally different. He started first week of January that year, and he was loitering around for almost 3 months. And my boss said to me, this chap doesn't listen. I tell him, before I could even finish, he would claim to know what I'm talking about and would understand, and then say, no, I understand. And then he produces the opposite. And he said, no, I've tried to tell him this, and he seemed to be unable to get through his head. He was getting frustrated. Yeah, this chap was not realizing that. So, on the other hand, I needed capacity. This guy had no capacity in the area, but he had only one thing, the positive attitude. So I had a chat with him. I said, I like your attitude towards work. Would you mind joining my team? I will work with you for a few months, and then, we agree on the model of working. And then I was clear right up front that I would like you to, at some point, to stand on your own and lead. Unbelievable. Initially, yes, it was a bit tough, but I also had to be tougher with him, having the benefit of what my boss was saying. But my toughness was to make sure that he realizes what he was doing to damage his potential. And fortunately for him, he did realize. And then he started to excel. He then, after a while, established himself in the DST. And even senior people would now rely on him. I didn't even have to bother about that area of work. You know, I was then able to do other things. And then he got a promotion elsewhere in the Department of Justice. That department was battling to get an unqualified audit, partly because of non-financial information. That's what that chap went there. He changed. Now that's the thing of the past. The second example is another lady. Same story. Well, in her case, I appointed her. I could see the potential. Again, you know, she was young, had only worked at a provincial level, and the dynamics of national and provincial youth. So, you know, I mentored her until she was able. She went to COCTA, the corporate.
Right.
Again, she told me this year, said, boss, when she still calls me, boss. I said, yes. Said, you won't believe. Last year we got unqualified, you know, and was called by the DG when all senior managers were there. And DG said, I have always been told that it was not possible for us to obtain this positive outcome from the AG. But this year we've managed. I want you to call that young woman. I want her to come and tell me in front of you. How did she do it? You know. So I'm just citing those two examples to show you what it means to me. Because at the time, I did not realize what these colleagues will end up being, and the impact that they are now making in the departments. For me, that's the most important thing. And people could distinctly attribute such progress towards them. That's the most fulfilling.
Now, Mlungisi, you indicated that leadership is absolutely critical for the future of technology.
Yes.
And for making technology work for the benefit of the community. Can you tell us who are the role models of leadership that you would advise future leaders should study and maybe learn from?
Well, let me use the example of, let me use countries instead of individuals, individual companies, right? Because people will know about Microsoft, so
Sure.
I wouldn't say, you know, and Google. But you can still make examples about it. But from where I am, I would say, if you take a country like South Korea, in the 60s, I know this is it's highly contested. Because if you compare it with, I know there is a comparison that is sometimes made between South Korea and Ghana, which in the 60s were more or less the same, but the conditions are different. But nevertheless, you look at the journey that South Korea has traveled since 1960, up to a point where we are now, some of us are using Samsung, and I had the pleasure of visiting both the laboratory and the headquarters of Samsung a few years back, and be told the inside story of how the South Koreans got to where they are. You know, it was about taking a long-term view through foresight, formal systemic foresight exercise that the then dictator said, you know, having observed how the Germans were doing, said, I want us to embark on a process that will identify few technologies that we need to focus on. And indeed, they identified very few, one of which resulted in the Samsung that they are having. That was identified in the 80s. And this is 2018, they are now reaping the fruits.
Right.
So, my message to all leaders is foresight exercise is vitally, embarking on a foresight exercise is very important to any organization if it wants to succeed. Because what a foresight exercise will do, it will help you to understand where you are in a first instance, because you will appreciate what are the technological trends globally and locally, and which of those are likely to impact on your organization, and which ones would help you to improve your competitive and comparative edge. But most importantly, the foresight, unlike forecasting where you project the future from where you are, you take yourself, you cast your eyes far, whether it's 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, and say, in 20 years, this is where I would like to be, identifying few futures. And then work backward, in a very systematic way, and and then say, okay, for my company to get there, these are the technologies that I will need to develop. If I can't develop, let me import and develop the necessary capacities. I will need to stop these operations. These are the wild cards. So for me, that would be
a role model.
Yes, it's a process that I will strongly urge everyone to consider embarking upon. Free yourself of where you are, because the future is so uncertain. You can't predetermine what the future, but there are tools developed already that will help you to imagine the future, and then work backwards to then consider where you are. And it would also help you to understand what technologies you should be or should not be pursuing, and what resources and the level of resources, who are likely to be your competitors and why. It could also help you to study your competitors. It's a tool that is being used successfully because those countries that like South Korea, I'm just using as a country, but also even their own companies, their own firms, they developed based on that vision, and then they grew.
Right. Now, Mlungisi, how can people connect with you, and where can our listeners follow your thought leadership?
Well, I'm available on email, Facebook, Twitter, even though I'm not yet active on Twitter, but I'm there. But NACI and DST, we're working together. We have a website. It's quite active. It's got different activities.
Right.
They can. I'm also available on the phone as well if people want to. I try and make sure that I'm as available to people who need help as possible.
And last but not least, is there one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own leadership?
I think this point has been mentioned before, but they must value their employees as assets to their organizations, because they will make or break. So if you value your people, in a world that is fast changing, driven by technological revolutions, the only thing that you can be in control of as a leader, it's people. You're not going to be in control of technological change that may fundamentally transform your organization. But it is people that will help you to understand and be able to deal with the technological change in a way that's beneficial to your organization, but also to you as a leader, as well as them as individuals. So that would be my advice. I can't think of anything else that would be so helpful for them. Otherwise, they will end up later on regretting having accumulated so much money, and now they want to set up philanthropic organizations trying to make up for having neglected that human element. No, it is actually at the center, even from where I am as a science, technology, and innovation policy person. We are told that for a long time, STI policy used to focus on products and processes. That was the main drive. Now, innovation must improve products that go into the market, the processes. But now, no, it's no longer about that. It's changed. That's why they talk about societal challenges or grand challenges. The question is, what can STI do for humanity? Humanity is at the center of everything that is being done.
Thank you. Mlungisi, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future, and especially for leading by example. I think your journey, your personal journey, is incredibly inspiring, growing up in the most impoverished community in the country. And thank you for mentoring so many future leaders. And thank you for helping us to build a better world and a better future.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Nick.